Continuing on in our series of panels, now that we are inside the top 20, squarely inside the top 20 on Warchant TV, alongside Ira Schoffel, the managing editor of Warchant.com, Gene Williams, the founder and administrator of Warchant.com. My name is Tom Lang. And let's take a look at the list, boys. This is going to be 20 to 11. So 5 new names are going to be revealed, and we'll go into depth about that. But as a refresher, 20 through 15, Bless Harris on the offensive line at 20. Deuce, as he was formerly known, but Fentrell Cypress at 19, Joshua Farmer, 18, Braden Fisk, the transfer from Western Michigan at 17, and then we've got a tie, and that's where we'll pick it up here at 15. The 2 linebackers, go figure about that, fellas. The linebackers tied for the 15 slot. So in the previous video, they talked more about Tatum Bethune, but I'll open the floor to you. Gentlemen, are they that inseparable at linebacker that we just decided as a staff to lock them in together? Kalen DeLoach and Tatum Bethune. Ira, I'll start with you. Your thoughts about those 2 linebackers and how they might be a little bit different and how they might impact the team in this 2023 season.
Yeah, they are different to some degree, but they're very similar in the sense that, they both played a ton of college football. They both, the returning starters, they both have been productive players, but they also weren't like sensational last season. I think, you look at both guys probably dealt with some injuries last year. Tatum Bethune for sure. I mean, there were weeks upon weeks where he really wasn't even practicing, but he had to play on Saturdays. And you go back to 2 years ago, he had over 100 tackles at UCF. So I think there's a potential for upside with him. And then Kalen DeLoach, there's obviously potential for upside because he's one of the best athletes, I think, on the defense. So, I think we're all just kind of in a little bit of, I don't know, say like kind of trepidation or not really sure exactly what we're going to get out of those guys. I think they have a chance to be the leading tacklers on the team, but I also don't think that many of us feel like they're one of the top 5 or 10 players on the team. So they're just kind of in that middle ground, I think.
If you had to pick one, Ira, before I get to Gene, in terms of value for this season, who do you think is going to be the more productive player?
It's probably unpopular, but I'm going to say Tatum Bethune. I mean, I think Kalen DeLoach is a better athlete, but I think Tatum Bethune, his communication skills, his ability to diagnose plays ahead of time, I think he's a really smart player and he's physical. And I think, again, if he's fully healthy, I think we'll see a different Tatum Bethune.
Gene, we'll pivot to you now. Your thoughts on those 2 players. Who did you have higher, and your thoughts on the linebacker position for Florida State?
Yeah, thanks. I already took all my good points on this, but that's how this goes when you go second. But no, I did have a little bit of separation between Bethune and Kalen DeLoach. I'm a little higher, I think, on Bethune than the field, and I think Ira pointed out the injury issue. I don't think you realize, go back to that year before at UCF, he was a really good player. Look at his PFF grades, his tackle totals, all that. He was a different player, and I attributed that, whether it was health or whether it was being in a new system. But both of those are done now. He's healthy. He's been in the system for a year. I think he's really going to flourish. And you think about how good that defensive front is this year compared to last year. Right. It is set up for a linebacker to just thrive, or both linebackers. I think they're really going to have a good season. I think he's going to be your leading tackler. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets over 100 tackles this season. I mean, I looked last year, guys. You know where he was ranked last year by the consensus? Number 8. Yeah, so what's changed so much? I mean, he was hurt in a new system, and suddenly we've got him way down, not way down, but relatively down for that. I still think he should be in the top 10, if not top 15. So I'm really high on Bethune. DeLoach, I think the thing is, we saw improvement with him. I think the thing, if you go back, and I like to look at PFF because it's objective, but he was all over the place on his grades. It was like a Christmas tree, seeing all the different colors. So I'd want to see. I pushed him down a little bit because I don't think I've seen the consistency out of him. So still top 20, definitely player. Again, he's going to flourish because of that defensive line. So I like both guys in the top 20, but I think Bethune, a healthy Bethune, is going to be, I think, a leader at that position.
Okay, so both you guys are passing the ball to me for DeLoach, and that's fine. That's fine. We'll go up. We'll expand to the top 15 here as you guys can see it. And I'll a little bit more on Kalen DeLoach. Perhaps it's a dirty word in football, but I look at the potential of what you saw the first few games last season. I think he was dealing with something that didn't allow him to play at 100% after September. He didn't look like the same player, but when you have to match up against a quarterback like LSU's and Louisville's, and you saw how Kalen DeLoach could be stride for stride with Jaden Daniels and Malik Cunningham, the dude is shot out of a cannon. And I think in terms of NFL draft prospects, I know that's not how we grade here, but Kalen DeLoach has a ton of potential to move to that next level and make an impact. The question is, and what is a money year for him? Can he be productive and can he be consistently healthy enough to go make plays? Number 14 on the list. Now, this gets interesting because I know the guy in the top left of the screen. That's a memory game. Do you guys remember who was on the top left? He and I agree about the importance of one Maurice Smith. So, Gene, with all that said, you have him at number 19. Ira and I are carrying the flag for Maurice Smith for warchant.com because we both had him at the highest level across the staff at 11. Your thoughts on Maurice Smith at number 19?
My thoughts are I hate that I'm last on Maurice Smith, man. I went back and looked before we taped this, and I'm like, oh, I'm sure I had him higher, the higher half, and I looked, and everybody in the staff had him higher than me, and I have a hard time justifying that, honestly. It's tough. I mean, you made all the good points. I mean, I think he's the rock of that offensive line. I mean, as good as Roddick is, we love the thought of it. You guys brought that up, but man, you saw the snapping in the spring. I don't care if he makes every snap perfect in fall practices. He's not starting that first game because you can't, in a real game, you can't risk that. And like I said, he was tough. He did all the right things coming through here. So I think honestly, if you go back last year, I probably had him higher than everybody in the staff. So I'm kind of having a hard time explaining my position here. All I can say is I could see a scenario where sometime midseason, Roddick continues to show consistently, comes off the bench in some of these situations where they're ahead, proves that he can snap. And it gives you that physicality that you pointed out down the stretch. When you're going to play, if you're going to get down the road, you're playing Clemson in the ACC championship game. Maybe you get to the playoffs. You're playing those elite defensive fronts. You want a guy like Roddick going against those, potential NFL first rounders when you're playing those elite SEC teams. So I could see that scenario. But other than that, I mean, Maurice is fantastic. I don't have anything negative to say about him.
Okay, Ira, I'll play devil's advocate. Is Maurice Smith on your list at 11 because there are no other options? More because of that, or more because that he's just a good football player? How would you see it?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of a combination. I mean, if Casey Roddick had been just excellent at snapping in the spring, and we don't know, the last 3 months, I mean, he may have made great improvements. It's hard to tell, though, if you're not in full pads with defensive tackles lined up over you. But Maurice Smith the offense was completely different when he was not out there. So that's a part of it, but also a part of it, like Gene said, I mean, he's not the guy that we saw 2 or 3 years ago. I think a lot of people remember Maurice Smith when he was forced into action early as a redshirt freshman, and he wasn't ready. He wasn't physically ready. And when teams lined up nose guards right over top of him, then his snapping was even an issue because he knew he couldn't really handle them physically. But he's come so far. And I think he's kind of, and this is something fans wouldn't know and we wouldn't know except for the fact that we do get the access we get at practice, but he's kind of the alpha of that room. I mean, Maurice Smith kind of runs that offensive line group, and so I think that's something that you can't really minimize either, especially at the center position. So it's a combination, but I think, yeah, man, I think he'll be the guy. And I think the toughness, he also, like you said, when he went down with that knee injury over in Jacksonville, nobody thought he was going to play in the first couple games. And then sure enough, he did. So he's got some toughness to him.
Hit the thumbs up underneath this video. Please like. And if you want to subscribe, it is also absolutely free at the bottom of this video. Number 13 is a do-it-all defensive back for Florida State. He was an afterthought coming into the 2022 season, but Renardo Green was more than just a steady Eddie at defensive back. I probably need to start with myself. I have him the lowest of anybody on staff at 19, while Ira, you have Renardo Green at 12, and Gene has him just ahead of me at 18. The reason I don't have Renardo Green up in that top 10 is I just don't know what home he's going to find. He's going to play, and he's going to start. I do believe that. But there's just so much shuffling to be done at defensive back. If Fentrell Cypress develops into the player that Pro Football Focus thinks he is, then Renardo Green gets slid in one direction. If Azareye'h Thomas rises up to his potential, then Renardo Green maybe slides to slot or safety. I'm not so sure. So that's why I hedge my bets with Renardo Green somewhere in the later teens. I'll pivot to Ira, then to Gene. Why did you have him so high, Ira, on your list? Was it a function of all of last year, or do you think that he's just one of the best defensive backs that Florida State has, period?
Yeah, I don't think he's moving anywhere. I mean, I think if anybody moves, it's going to be people moving around him. I think he proved to be their best corner last year. And I don't, Fentrell Cypress was second team All ACC, and he may play at that level. But if he does, that's great. Then you've got your two starting corners. I think Jarian Jones is more likely to move around. I think, like you said, Azareye'h Thomas is more likely to move around. You obviously have the other guys, Noles and Greedy Vance and guys like that have moved around. The thing with Renardo is he got moved around early in his career. he started at corner, then they moved him to safety, and it didn't go well. Then he got injured. Then they finally moved him back to corner, and he found success. Man, I just don't think they're going to move him anymore. And I think he's going to be a rocket corner. And I mean, is he one of the best 3 or 4 corners in the ACC? I'm not sure, but I think he might be Florida State's best corner. If he's not the best, then that's good news because that means Fentrell Cypress is as good as advertised.
Gene, your thoughts on Renardo as it relates to Florida State's defensive back room? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I kind of nailed. He might be your best defensive back, regardless of position right now. I mean, we'll talk about Shyheim here at some point, but he's definitely up there as one of your better players. And again, I think at the end of spring, as Ira pointed out, I think it was your best cornerback in the spring. Now we'll see if Fentrell Cypress can live up to expectations, but he clearly was ahead of him at the end of spring. So I mean, when you have your what looks like going to be your top cornerback, man, he's got to be a top 15, top 20 type player. So I think that's a good ranking for him.
All right, now to another defensive back. You see him on the list. I know somebody loves this guy, and then somebody else proved that they love this guy. So we've got Gene ranking Shyheim Brown at number 9, Ira at 16, and I'm right behind Ira at 17 on our personal top 40 lists. Gene, go ahead and brag on Shyheim Brown. Why'd you have him in the top 10?
Well, part of it is your top player on defense. One of your top players is safety, Jamie Robinson, is gone. So I just think somebody's got to slide into that leadership role back there at that safety position. And you look at the end of last year, and again, going by PFF, he was in the green 3 of the last 4 games, and he showed dramatic improvement. I think that carried over to the spring. We've seen that. I just think this is a position where, with the improvements up front, I think a safety, he's got good instincts, the athleticism, all that thing could really shine, especially if he continues to build on everything, which we saw at the end of last year in the spring. So I think he's poised to have a really big season back there. So I mean, that's all it is. I think he's going to be a playmaker this year. He's shown the improvement. I love what I'm seeing out of him.
Ira, we've been on the same team for a lot of players across the offense and the defense. Rodney Hill is one of the more recent ones that come to mind. But you have been a trailblazer on the Shyheim Brown front since he was a freshman, since you saw him in his first camp. So what gives here? Why at 16?
Yeah, I'm gonna harken back to Gene's comments about Maurice Smith. Is I just kind of blew it. I think I had him higher, and then just started moving guys who maybe had more experience and maybe played at more high leverage positions, and just kind of started moving them up higher. And it's just one of those things where when you look back at the end of it, that's probably not where I wanted to have him. I think I think somewhere between where I have him and where we have him, where Gene has him, is probably more accurate. But he might be a little boomer bust. I think that's the concern I have with Shyheim. Is I think he's got incredible potential. I think he's an NFL football player, and it needs to happen. He made a couple plays last year where he maybe didn't do the right thing, but then got the right result. And I think that's like something you worry about with him is he needs to be very disciplined. He needs to make right decisions because he's got all the ability. So, man, I hope Gene's right. He's one of my favorite players, and I think if he is that guy, I think it's going to be a huge deal for this defense.
Yeah, on a personal level, I'll say that this could be one of the places that I look the most foolish if we do the January come to Jesus meeting after the season's over, and you say, where did you get it wrong? Shyheim Brown could easily be in the top 10 by the end of the season, and they say, what were you thinking? But it's just the bangs and the bruises concern, and it's the experience concern. But if he looks healthy and ready to go against LSU, this could look foolish by the second quarter of that game. So we shall see. We now go to the number 1 player on today's list, which is the number 11 overall player. He's been Florida State's starting left tackle, it feels like, for 5 years, but it's Robert Scott, who missed spring camp with an undisclosed issue, but he is slated to be back in time, ready to go for fall camp, preseason camp, to get Florida State where it needs to go on the offensive line against LSU and Clemson in that critical first month of the season. I've got to defend my own position here because as we wipe to the bottom of the screen, Gene and Ira both have him in the top 10, and I do not. Oof. So while I love Robert Scott and I love that you can depend upon him as the left tackle, I think that Florida State has cultivated some other options that aren't necessarily better, but good enough for me to pause just a little bit. He's into my top 15. He's going to start for Florida State. But I think Bless Harris had an exceptional spring camp. I think that Jeremiah Byers, if you wanted to, could play tackle for FSU. And I just want to see Robert Scott, what he looks like from a body type standpoint in fall after going through what he needed to go through in spring. Is he back up to size? Is he back up to speed? Gene, is it just you put him in ink at left tackle and we move forward? Is that why you have Robert Scott at 7?
Yeah, effectively. I mean, it comes down to a guy that started 29 games for Alex Atkins. He started 17 of those at left tackle. I mean, he's got a guy he knows what to do. And all this is with the caveat that assuming he's fully healthy. Again, if he's not, obviously you can throw these out. But assuming he's fully healthy, I just think the nature of the position, his experience at the position, familiarity with Alex Atkins, what he knows he's going to get out of him. I think it's so important. There's a reason why I looked this up. There's 17 left tackles in the NFL that make over $10 million a year. The reason that the importance of position and what is more important to this team than any position, it's the guy behind him. So that left tackle is so important. That's the impact, is protecting Jordan's backside. So to me, that's what it is. The reliability, the familiarity, the experience, and then having Jordan there is why I have him so high. And I think he's right there with Maurice. Maurice might be kind of the leader of the group, but I think Robert Scott is right there as well. A guy who can take over more of that leadership role this year.
Ira, am I a fool for not putting him in the top 10? What do you think?
No, I mean, you make a good point. I mean, that was the challenge with all those offensive linemen, is that they do have other options. So that kind of makes the impact feel not as high. You know, for example, like last year, I think Dylan Gibbons, we probably had to have him super high because they just didn't have a lot of other options. If he didn't play, you know, there was going to be a huge drop off to whoever, Thomas Schrader, or, you know, I mean, whoever would, Bryson Estes, or, I mean, it just would have been a big drop off. This is a different deal now. They have a lot of other options, as you said. Guys, they could slide in guys who have started 20 games. So I get that point. But I'm more in line with Gene, obviously, as you can see by the voting. I just think that he's one of the really cool things I think about the way Alex Atkins and his staff, the way they coach offensive line, and Mike Norvell, is it's not necessarily about like, we're going to find 5 guys and let them go win their matchups. It's they work together. They know what their limitations are, and then they scheme around it. And I'm not telling people that Robert Scott is Walter Jones. What I'm saying is they know exactly what they can get out of him. He's smart. He's competitive. He knows his position. And then if there's any limitations that he has, they know how to work around those. Again, I think it's going to be a feeling out process maybe with some of those other tackles. So to me, he's clearly the left tackle. It's amazing, though. He missed one spring football, and like people have kind of forgotten about him. I mean, a lot of people are really downplaying and assuming that the new flavor of the month, these guys that transferred in, are going to start. I'm not so sure, man. I think Robert Scott's going to be a big part of that offensive line.
Well, once again, we point this out a lot. You want to have guys you can trust against LSU out the gate.
Right.
You know, if it was a ramp up, then perhaps there'd be more discussion.
Right.
But in Orlando, you've got to have people that you know where they're going to be if you're Alex Atkins, Mike Norvell, and so forth. So there it is, everybody. This is the top 20 to 11. We continue the countdown with 2 skill position players, 2 defensive linemen, and 1 more offensive lineman when we get from number 10 to number 6. That's what's coming up on Warchant TV. So for Ira and for Gene, the managing editor of Warchant.com, the founder and administrator of Warchant.com, my name is Tom Lang. We appreciate that you spent the time with us on Warchant TV, and we will break down number 10 through number 6 next time.